The Louisiana night hung heavy and still, draped over the small town like a thick velvet curtain. In the Anderson home, nestled at the edge of Willow Creek, everything seemed peaceful. Until it wasn't. Sarah Anderson's eyes snapped open, a sudden chill racing down her spine. Something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. She turned to her husband, Michael, who was still sleeping, and then looked toward Payton's bedroom door. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. When he didn't respond, she spoke louder. "Michael, something's wrong." He stirred, mumbling something incoherent. Sarah was already moving, her bare feet padding across the cold hardwood floor. Payton's door stood slightly ajar, something that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. They always kept her door closed at night, especially given her sleepwalking condition. The bedroom was empty. The bed, with its pink comforter and scattered stuffed animals, showed clear signs of recent occupancy. The window was locked, the room undisturbed. But Payton was gone. "No, no, no," Sarah muttered, her hands beginning to shake. She checked the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains. Anywhere a 10-year-old might hide. Nothing. Michael was fully awake now, sensing the panic in his wife's voice. "What's happening?" "Payton's gone," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "She's not in her room." They searched the house frantically. The bathroom, the kitchen, the living room, every conceivable hiding spot. But Payton was nowhere to be found. "Her sleepwalking," Michael said, the color draining from his face. "She could have wandered out." The realization hit them both like a physical blow. Payton had a history of sleepwalking, a condition they'd been managing carefully. She'd wake up in strange places before. The hallway, the kitchen, once even in the backyard. But never like this. Sarah's hands were shaking as she dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to her own frantic breathing. "My daughter. She's missing. She's 10, and she sleepwalks. We think she might have left the house." Outside, the dense Louisiana woods loomed, a dark, impenetrable wall of trees and shadows. Those woods had always been a source of local legends, of mysterious disappearances and unexplained sounds. Now, they represented every parent's worst nightmare. Within 30 minutes, the quiet street was transformed. Police vehicles, their lights cutting through the darkness, created a surreal scene. Neighbors emerged from their homes, wrapped in robes and jackets, their faces a mixture of concern and fear. Sheriff Tom Landry, a local law enforcement veteran, took charge quickly. "We need search parties," he told Michael. "Given her sleepwalking, she could have wandered quite far." Local volunteers began to assemble. Hunters with tracking experience, neighbors, friends, everyone who knew the Anderson family wanted to help. They understood the unique danger of Payton's condition. "She's always been a deep sleeper," Sarah told the sheriff, her voice tight with emotion. "But her sleepwalking, it's unpredictable. Sometimes she walks for minutes, sometimes longer. We've tried everything, locks, alarms, even consulting specialists." The first search teams were dispatched into the woods. Flashlights cut through the dense foliage, creating momentary patches of light in the overwhelming darkness. Dogs were brought in, their handlers hoping the animals could pick up Payton's scent. As dawn approached, the initial hope began to fade. Hours of searching had yielded nothing. No trace of Payton, no footprints, no disturbance in the underbrush. The woods seemed to guard their secret jealously, dark and impenetrable. Michael held Sarah as she wept, her body shaking with fear and exhaustion. The community around them remained united, determined. But beneath the resolve A terrible question hung in the air. Would they find Payton before it was too late? The first rays of morning light began to pierce through the trees, bringing with them a new sense of urgency. Payton had been missing for hours, and in these woods, every moment counted. The search continued. The pre-dawn air hung heavy with moisture and desperation as Sheriff Tom Landry coordinated the search efforts near the edge of Willow Creek's most treacherous woodland. The dense Louisiana forest seemed to swallow hope with each passing moment, its thick canopy and tangled undergrowth concealing any trace of 10-year-old Payton Anderson. "Fan out!" Landry shouted to the assembled volunteer search party. "Stay within visual range of each other, and don't miss a single square foot." Tracking dogs pulled against their handlers' restraints, their keen noses sweeping the ground for any hint of Payton's scent. Volunteers moved in carefully organized lines. Each step was calculated, each moment weighted with the understanding that every minute counted. Michael Anderson stood at the periphery of the search, his face a map of exhaustion and raw emotion. Sarah gripped his hand, her knuckles white, her eyes never leaving the forest's edge. They had already spoken with the search coordinators, providing every possible detail about Payton's sleepwalking patterns, her typical behaviors, and the clothing she was wearing when she disappeared. "We need thermal imaging," Landry muttered to his deputy, Jake Rodriguez. "This terrain is too dense for a traditional ground search." Rodriguez nodded, already reaching for the emergency drone kit stored in their command vehicle. The thermal imaging technology would allow them to scan areas too dangerous or difficult for human searchers to access immediately. It was their last hope of finding any trace of Payton before the critical first 24 hours elapsed. The drone lifted into the air, its quiet hum a counterpoint to the frantic human activity below. Its thermal camera swept methodically across the landscape, cutting through the forest's visual complexity to detect any heat signatures that might indicate human presence. Hours crawled by. The initial surge of adrenaline gave way to a grinding, soul-crushing exhaustion. Volunteers rotated in shifts, but the core team remained committed. Local hunters who knew every inch of these woods joined the search, their expertise proving invaluable in navigating the most challenging terrain. "Temperatures dropping," Rodriguez announced, checking his mobile weather app. "We're looking at near-freezing conditions. If Payton's out there—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone understood the implications. Sarah Anderson's medical background kicked in, her mind racing through the potential scenarios. A child in light pajamas, lost in these woods, with temperatures dropping. The risks were astronomical. Hypothermia could set in quickly, and every minute reduced Payton's chances of survival. The thermal drone continued its methodical sweep, scanning quadrants of the forest with mechanical precision. Each pass felt like an eternity, each moment a potential revelation or continued heartbreak. "Something's different," the drone operator muttered, leaning closer to his screen. A faint heat signature had appeared, too small to be an adult, positioned in an area that was practically inaccessible by foot. "I've got something," he called out to Landry. Grid 17 Charlie. Weak heat signature, consistent with a small human form. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Hope, fragile and trembling, began to take shape. Michael and Sarah approached the command center, their faces a mixture of desperate hope and profound fear. They had been through countless scenarios in their minds, each more terrifying than the last. "We're preparing a recovery team," Landry said, his professional demeanor barely masking the emotion in his voice. "If that's Payton, we'll find her." The search had transformed from a community effort to something more, a collective heartbeat, synchronized in its desperate hope of finding a lost child. The woods, once a symbol of danger, now held the promise of potential rescue. As the first genuine rays of morning light began to break through the forest canopy, the search entered its most critical phase. The thermal drone had potentially located something or someone, and an elite rescue team was preparing to investigate the exact coordinates. Every eye was fixed on the forest's edge. Every heart was beating in synchronization. Every breath was a prayer. Would they find Payton? And if they did, would she be alive? The forest kept its secrets for just a moment longer. The drone's thermal imaging cut through the dense Louisiana forest like a lifeline of hope. Sheriff Tom Landry squinted at the screen, his weathered fingers tracing the faint heat signature that had emerged after 24 grueling hours of searching. "There!" he called out, his voice a mixture of excitement and caution. "We've got something." The rescue team moved with practiced urgency. Tracking dogs led the way, their handlers moving swiftly through the thick underbrush. Michael and Sarah Anderson stood nearby, their faces a canvas of desperate hope and exhaustion. Sarah clutched Michael's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white, her eyes never leaving the point where the rescue team would enter the woods. Just a few hundred meters from the forest's edge, they found her. Payton lay curled beneath a large oak tree, her light pajamas barely a shield against the cold that had threatened to consume her. Her small body was pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Deputy Rachel Martinez, who was part of the rescue team, was the first to reach her. "She's alive," she called back, her voice breaking with relief. The rescuers worked quickly. They wrapped Payton in thermal blankets, checking her vital signs. She was disoriented, her eyes struggling to focus, but she was alive. The miracle they had all hoped for was unfolding before their eyes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the local emergency physician, was waiting at the ambulance. As they carefully transported Payton, she spoke softly to Sarah and Michael. "She's suffering from mild hypothermia and exhaustion, but she's remarkably resilient. Her body found ways to conserve heat. She's got some impressive survival instincts for a 10-year-old. Michael couldn't hold back his tears. "How did she survive?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sheriff Landry, who had followed them, explained what they'd pieced together. "Looks like her sleepwalking led her deep into the woods. She found that tree for shelter, curled up to conserve body heat. The tree protected her from the worst of the wind and cold." Sarah touched her daughter's pale cheek, her hand trembling. The past 24 hours had been a nightmare of uncertainty, and now, finally, there was hope. Payton's eyes flickered, momentarily meeting her mother's gaze before closing again. At the hospital, a battery of tests confirmed what the initial assessment had suggested. Payton was weak, but would recover. The medical staff marveled at her survival. The temperatures had dropped to near freezing, and she had been dressed only in thin pajamas, with no protection against the elements. News of Payton's rescue spread quickly through Willow Creek. The community that had come together to search now celebrated her return. Neighbors brought food to the Anderson home. Volunteers who had participated in the search shared tearful embraces, and a collective sense of relief washed over the town. As Payton rested in her hospital room, surrounded by the soft beeping of medical equipment, Sarah sat close to her bed. Michael stood by the window, looking out at the world that had nearly taken their daughter away. "We're going to figure this out," Sarah whispered, stroking Payton's hand. The sleepwalking that had nearly cost them their daughter would not be left unchecked. This experience had changed everything. The doctors explained that Payton's sleepwalking was more serious than they had previously understood. It wasn't just a harmless quirk. It was a condition that could put her in real danger. They recommended a comprehensive medical evaluation, potential treatments, and strategies to keep her safe. As the day turned to evening, the Anderson family began to process the miracle of Payton's survival. The forest that had seemed so menacing, so full of potential horror, had ultimately protected their daughter. She had found shelter, had found a way to survive against seemingly impossible odds. The story of Payton's disappearance and miraculous rescue would become a defining moment for Willow Creek, a testament to the power of community, hope, and the extraordinary resilience of a child. The Anderson home buzzed with a mixture of relief and nervous energy. Payton, wrapped in a soft blanket, sat quietly between her parents, her eyes distant but alive. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a local sleep specialist, examined her gently, explaining the intricate nature of her sleepwalking condition to Michael and Sarah. Payton's case is particularly complex, Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice compassionate. Sleepwalking can occur during deep sleep cycles, causing individuals to move without conscious awareness. In Payton's case, her episodes have become more pronounced and potentially dangerous. The town of Willow Creek had transformed overnight. What began as a desperate search had become a community united in celebration and purpose. Sheriff Tom Landry organized a community meeting at the local community center, inviting medical professionals, parents, and residents to discuss sleep disorders and child safety. Sarah, her hand clasped tightly with Michael's, stood before the gathered crowd. "Our nightmare could have ended differently," she said, her voice trembling. "We want to ensure no other family experiences what we went through." The community listened intently as they shared Payton's story, turning a moment of terror into an opportunity for education and awareness. Donations poured in for sleep disorder research, and local schools began implementing safety workshops for families. Payton looked around, sensing the love and protection surrounding her. Her miraculous survival had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of community and resilience.